Hello and welcome viewers, I'm Pia and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. On that note, let's take a look at news making headlines this hour. A Russian missile strike hit Vyshhorod, killing one person and injuring 5. According to regional emergency services, firefighters have battled burning buildings as residents were evacuated. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has stated that work is still underway after large-scale Russian missile and drone attacks hit the country's energy infrastructure. He also mentioned that strengthening air defense remains Kyiv's #1 priority. Venezuela has denounced US President Donald Trump's call to close its airspace, calling it a colonialist threat and a violation of international law. Trump has stated that all flights above and around the country should be considered closed in its entirety. Activists in New York City have protested near a GSA lot to stop ICE from departing for an immigration raid. President Trump has increased officer deployments nationwide, though most of those detained have no criminal convictions. Public anger has grown as residents mourn the loss of more than 128 lives in a deadly blaze in a high-rise in Hong Kong. Meanwhile, Beijing has warned against using the tragedy in order to stir unrest. According to reports, China's military and coast guard conducted patrols around Scarborough Shoal to safeguard its sovereignty and maritime rights. The Philippine embassy in Beijing has not responded yet to a request for comment. Taiwan plans to acquire Israeli takeover technology for a counter-drone system to protect airports, power plants and other critical infrastructure. The system can jam, spoof and seize drones using advanced methods outlined by the NCS-IST. Floods and landslides from cyclonic rains have killed more than 303 people in Sumatra. Around 80,000 have been evacuated and more than 279 remain missing, and hundreds have been stranded across 3 provinces amid ongoing severe weather. Well, viewers, those are the headlines and our top focus. According to Ukraine's State Emergency Service, a Russian drone strike has killed 1 person and wounded 11 others, including a child near Kyiv. The attack targeted Vyshhorod, a town on the outskirts of the Ukrainian capital. Mykola Kalashnik, the regional governor, has confirmed the casualties. Firefighters were dousing flames and evacuating residents as well. The latest attacks follow a deadly missile and drone strike on the 29th of November, which killed 6 people and injured dozens across the capital region. Ukrainian officials are in Washington negotiating terms for a potential peace agreement, with talks also scheduled between President Zelenskyy and French President Macron in Paris on the anvil. With us on the broadcast this morning is Professor Veselin Popovsky, Professor and Vice Dean of Jindal Global Law School. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. We've been tracking these strikes, the frequency of which has increased quite heavily. These have taken place. Yesterday we learned that 6 people were injured, had lost their lives. Dozens were injured. Today the death toll is at 1, but 11 have been wounded, including a child as well. We do know that a Ukrainian delegation is in the United States of America to iron out the final terms, but we don't know what exactly is included in that document. The original draft that had come out, that was in fact revealed by the Associated Press, that of course was being criticized for being very sympathetic to the Russian side and the Russian cause. Meanwhile, of course, Ukraine has its own priorities. The larger question being whether a NATO-style security guarantee can be implemented for Ukraine as well. The cap that was there on the size of the Ukrainian armed forces, whether that would be removed or not. In all of this, how do you assess the approach that the Trump administration has taken place? There are murmurs that, with the involvement of Army Secretary Dan Driscoll, it seems that the J.D. Vance club has a little more say in what's going on.
Well, it's difficult to assess because it's so hectic and erratic what the presidential administration does. They change their mind. They say one thing today, another thing tomorrow. One person goes into Moscow, another person meets Ukrainians in United States. There will be more meetings and more changes in the original plan. Effectively, it shows that very little can be delivered by this administration. Donald Trump wants to be seen as a peacemaker, but these are illusions. He's absolutely no peacemaker. He talks about making peace, but he doesn't deliver anything. Russia doesn't want peace, and that's very clear, and only the Americans don't understand that. They continue believing that one morning they wake up and Putin changes his mind and accepts a peace. That's impossible. Even if Putin signs a peace agreement tomorrow, that means nothing, because Putin can change his mind and say, no, I didn't do that. So with such a liar and manipulator like Putin, whatever Trump is trying to do doesn't make absolutely no sense. There will be more rounds of negotiations. Russians are definitely trying to bribe Trump, and that's what basically that document of these 28 useless points was about. They offer Donald Trump some billions just to make him accept their terms. They push for Ukrainians to surrender Donbass, which will never happen. Russians are trying to get territory they cannot get with their military. And it's really a farce to watch. And I don't know whether it's a tragedy or a comedy, but yeah, tragic comedy. There was such a genre in the ancient Greece.
So you've chalked it down to Trump, of course, trying to project his image as a strong man, a deal maker, a peace broker as well, and the optics around it. But what's happening on the ground is that President Zelenskyy is also slated to meet French President Macron, who's been very vocal about France's backing of Ukraine up until now. I want to understand from you, what are your expectations from this meeting? Because it did seem that with all the European allies coming together and sort of drawing out red lines, that the meeting that happened between Marco Rubio and the Ukrainian delegation in Geneva, there was some sort of consensus that was reached over there. In light of all of this, what are your expectations from the upcoming meetings?
Well, this is now something serious. When it comes to Macron, to Keir Starmer, Friedrich Merz, the European leaders are serious. And they are, in fact, the real players here for solving the issue. They're imposing sanctions on Russia. They are supporting Ukraine with military and financial means. So, in fact, they are buying from United States the weapons that Ukraine needs. So, all of this is playing very well. Europe is very united, exactly with that incompetent US president. They need to be united and to take the issues in their own hands, and they show that commitment, that devotion. They would like to be the real players in this. So meetings such as Macron, Starmer, and Merz, and everybody else in Europe are important to watch, because this is where most of the news will come from, not from Putin, not from Donald Trump.
Interestingly, as a quick follow-up to Macron in specific, he's also slated to visit Beijing. He's also likely to rake up this particular war. The fact that even though China does not openly back Russia through tacit means, through the export of dual-use items like fiber optic cables, like lithium-ion batteries, it does enable Russia to manufacture drones that are then used to strike deeper into Ukrainian territory. He's also likely to rake up the fact that China is the largest importer of Russian oil. To what extent do you think Macron taking this up with Xi Jinping could help the Ukrainian side?
Well, we don't know yet, but yes, such attempts are important. You're absolutely correct that China is playing kind of a double game. They are not supporting openly the Russian aggression to Ukraine, but they do all the business with Russia. As you said, they buy a lot of oil and gas, which fuels war in terms of money, because Russia needs to buy weapons and drones and soldiers, including from North Korea. So money is what fuels the war, and the export of Russian oil and gas brings that money. And obviously, there will be an attempt by Macron to talk to the Chinese and somehow to signal to him that more China is doing that game. There will be no chance for peace, because Putin can fight forever if he got the money to fight forever, and China and India and other buyers of Russian oil and gas provide that money to continue the war forever. And that's the message here. Stop buying Russian oil and gas and everything else, and Putin will surrender. Simple.
Indeed, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking some further updates as far as the war is concerned. We're now learning that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has in fact emphasized that strengthening air defense remains Kyiv's top priority following large-scale Russian missile and drone attacks on the country's energy infrastructure. Remember, there were nearly 600,000 people around the capital region who were left without power after the strikes yesterday. Zelenskyy, meanwhile, had confirmed that nearly 560 drones and 19 missiles were intercepted during the assault by Russia. Listen in.
Зараз ще тривають роботи після нічного удару російських ракет і дронів. Масштабний був удар. Енергетика – основна ціль. Тут Росія не змінює свою тактику і досі намагається завдати Україні саме такого болю перед зимою. Важливо, що ми протидіємо. Важливо, що є збиття. 19 ракет вдалося збити. Серед них балістика. Подавлено також майже 560 безпілотників, серед яких близько 300 шахеди. На жаль, не все було збито, і працювати для більш сильної ППО – це пріоритет номер 1. Готуємось до роботи на наступному тижні з нашими партнерами, в тому числі заради більш якісної нашої протиповітряної оборони. Дуже розраховуємо на сприяння партнерів.
Professor Popovsky is still with us on the broadcast. We just heard what President Zelenskyy has had to say. But interestingly, the statistics speak for themselves. The fact that in just one assault, there were over 560 drones, 19 missiles that were used by the Russians. In light of this sort of hybrid warfare that we're seeing, what really are the urgent needs of the Ukrainians? We did, in fact, just a while back discuss the fact that France will be supplying Rafales to Ukraine, but that's more of a long-term plan. What's required at the short term to counter these threats? Sir, I beg your pardon. Yes, you're muted at the moment. If we can just increase the volume. Yes, sir, we can hear you now.
These are the numbers. You are correct that daily Russia can use about 500, 600 drones and about 30, 40, 50 missiles. 90% of those are gunned down by the Ukrainian air defense system, but still about 10% of those hit the targets. And this is why we have those casualties, those injured people, and so on. So obviously, Ukraine needs to receive more air defense system, especially the Patriot system could be very effective. Europeans should speed up those deliveries and protect the biggest cities, and not only all the cities, plus also the energy infrastructure. Obviously, the strategy of the Russians is to hit energy infrastructure. Winter is coming, temperatures are low, it's getting colder, and they want to make the life of Ukrainians miserable. Russia doesn't do anything else. They cannot advance on the battlefield. They cannot capture Donbass as they try for 20 months, and they are nowhere even near to what they want to achieve in the battlefield. But they want to make the life of the Ukrainians miserable and somehow to reduce the motivation of the Ukrainians to surrender. This is not going to happen. Ukrainians are united, they support their president, and they want to survive. They want simply to defend their territories, their cities, their families, and they will continue to fight. But they need, you're right, they need, and that's what Zelensky also said. He appealed to the Europeans to provide more air defense systems as for those attacks not to produce such civilian damage.
All right, so with that, I would like to thank you for taking out time, of course, sharing your analysis and insights with us on NewsX World today. On that note, viewers, we're shifting focus away from the war between Ukraine and Russia towards what's taking place within the United States of America. We're now learning that protests erupted in New York City. Activists gathered near a government parking lot to block U.S. immigration officers from leaving for a raid in Manhattan. This action comes as President Trump has sent more ICE officers to major cities. His goal is historic levels of deportations, including long-term residents and people with no criminal record. Now, ICE statistics do show that as of the 15th of November, more than two-thirds of the roughly 53,000 people arrested had no criminal convictions. Critics, in fact, say that the policy is sweeping up innocent residents. The protests, of course, come as tensions are growing over immigration enforcement in the United States of America. With us on the broadcast is Mr. Matthew Wadham, American journalist and author, joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for taking out time and speaking to us on NewsX World. It is one thing to protest and exercise the right to free speech and assembly, but another to outrightly block ICE operations and jeopardize federal government's authority to enforce the laws. In your assessment, will all of this backfire?
Well, I think it already is backfiring. I don't think that the public as a whole is opposed to President Trump's insistence on finally enforcing U.S. immigration law after enforcement fell into abeyance during the Biden administration. I think that there are pockets in the United States, like New York City, where this effort to obstruct immigration law enforcement took place, specifically in the Chinatown area in Manhattan in New York City. I think that there are efforts by, radicals, political leftists, to prevent the federal government from doing its job after many years of the federal government not doing its job. So there are places where people want to stop the federal government from enforcing immigration law. And there are other places too, like Oregon, where the governor just threatened to charge federal immigration officers if they try to enforce the law in Oregon. And this is not going to turn out well for the governor of Oregon, Tina Kotek, I think is her name. And she's going to find out pretty quickly that she can't do that. And, there are other places too, like, Los Angeles and various other spots in the United States where the government is insisting on cracking down and weeding out illegal aliens. And this is what the law is. If people don't like it, they're free to protest. They're free to ask Congress to change the law. But this is the law of the land, and they are not free to use physical force to prevent immigration and customs enforcement, ICE officials, from enforcing the law. That's not permitted, and those who obstruct law enforcement, are going to be arrested, as some already have been.
Indeed. So the larger point here is that, activist obstruction might, in fact, weaken the sort of deterrence effect that they're trying to bring about, because the Trump administration is maintaining consistent immigration enforcement. Now in this context, I want to understand from you, should then the federal government take steps to ensure that cities and the local administration of these cities do not interfere with the immigration enforcement, and what might those steps really look like?
Oh, they could warn them that if you interfere with our operations, you're going to be dealt with, and you can be If you actually obstruct federal law enforcement, you can be charged with an offense. With the federalism system that the United States has, states and localities are not obligated to assist the federal government in enforcing U.S. immigration law. But at the same time, under something called the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, federal law is supreme and they cannot obstruct it. So they don't have to cooperate, but they don't have to lift a finger to help ICE go on an immigration raid, but they cannot obstruct ICE from going about its business. And I think, if anything, over time, the Trump administration is going to be doubling down on its policy and intensifying raids aimed at capturing illegal aliens with a view to removing them from the country. And they have met with, as you may have noticed, they've met with tremendous resistance from various state and local governments, and tremendous resistance even within the court system. A lot of judges have issued orders preventing ICE from acting, and most of those orders have been swept away by appellate courts, and ICE has been able to do its job. But there's a lot of resistance from left-wing politicians and left-wing federal judges who think they know better than Congress what the federal immigration law should be.
All right, so requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking some other very crucial developments. We're now learning that Venezuela's government has condemned President Trump's comments about the country's airspace, calling them a quote-unquote colonialist threat and a violation of international law. Now, President Trump's statement, which declared that the airspace above Venezuela should be considered closed in its entirety, has raised concerns in Caracas. U.S. officials were reportedly surprised by the announcement, with no clear information about any military operations to enforce this. The Pentagon and White House have yet to clarify on this particular matter, but we do have a reaction coming in from Maduro. Still with us on the broadcast is Mr. Matthew Wadham. Interesting development, because just yesterday we'd seen Donald Trump highlight the fact that he's keeping the diplomatic channels open. He is ready to hold face-to-face interactions with Maduro as well. They have spoken over the phone line, according to reports, sometime around last week. What we're seeing the U.S. do essentially is a military muscle flexing in the Caribbean with the deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the largest aircraft carrier and the most advanced as well. And on the other, Trump still keeping the diplomatic line open. How do you view this particular approach?
Well, it's not a bad idea to keep speaking to your enemy to try to resolve problems. So that's a good idea. I don't think anyone is really clear yet on what President Trump's declaration that the airspace is closed over Venezuela actually means, because one sovereign country cannot close the airspace of another sovereign country. That sounds very much like a blockade, which is an act of war, and would be, technically a violation of international law. Not that it really matters. A lot of things violate international law, but are unenforceable, and they're not that important. President Trump, it's not just the Trump administration. Even before that, the Biden administration, and I think the Obama administration,
Yes.
or at least the Biden administration, did not recognize the Nicolas Maduro government. They view it as illegitimate and
Yes.
as a dictatorship. And really, the United States doesn't just want Venezuela to stop trafficking drugs to the United States. U.S. has been blowing up ships that have been accused of trafficking in drugs, and some people are upset about that. But really, the goal is regime change in Venezuela, and I think that the Secretary of State Marco Rubio is particularly gung ho. This is a man whose family escaped from Cuba communist Cuba years ago, and they view the Venezuelan regime a socialist regime. One could make an argument it's communist, but I don't think it's as extreme as the Cuban regime. They want it to be replaced by a democratic regime. So really, the goal here is regime change, and saying that the airspace over Venezuela should be closed it sounds to me, it's akin to a blockade, and it suggests that some sort of further military action is coming. President Trump has been actually saying that they're going to take some action on land, but it's not really clear what he means by that. He's not showing all of his cards, but they do want to hurt the Venezuelan regime. One of the reasons they want to, apparently, is because I guess they haven't said this outright, but it stands to reason that they don't want Venezuela supplying so much oil to China. Communist China, there's a huge trade between China and Venezuela in oil, and the United States doesn't like that. The United States, under President Trump, wants to curb Chinese ambitions, and doesn't want China to have easy access to oil. It's part of the Trump administration's economic warfare against People's Republic of China, which has also included the heavy tariffs that were imposed on China. So what's going on in Venezuela is, I guess, an international power play that has many dimensions to it, and it's not primarily about drugs, about narco traffickers using boats to ship drugs to the United States. There's a lot more to it, and it's fairly complex.
Indeed, you have pointed out the complexities. You've, of course, highlighted what many other analysts are also pointing out, the fact that Venezuela has a large reserves of oil that, the U.S. is not comfortable with being exported to China. We've also seen the Trump administration sort of declare that the Cartel of the Suns, which is, as the Trump administration claims, headed in a way by Maduro as a terrorist organization. The Venezuelans have outrightly denied the existence of this particular cartel, but there are critics within the American establishment, particularly the Democrats, who then argue that this designation paves the way for Donald Trump to sort of circumvent congressional approval and strike Venezuela. To what extent would you concur with this analysis?
Well, I think declaring the, what was it, the Cartelo de los Soles?
Yes.
You said Cartel of the Sun, the English translation.
Yes.
Of the Suns. That is, I never actually heard it in English before, so anyway, I was a little thrown off by you. Sorry about that. Anyway, I only heard the Spanish before. I think that, that is part of clearing the way for the United States to take aggressive action against Venezuela. I don't think too many people expect it to be a full-on invasion, but there could be some surgical strikes against strategic targets within Venezuela, and which targets those would be is, your guess is as good as mine. Clearly the President Trump has been doing a lot of saber rattling because he doesn't like the regime in Venezuela for many different reasons. And as I said, Secretary Marco Rubio also doesn't like it. And they are interested in seeing some regime change there. Whether it will actually happen is another question, because a lot of these socialist, dictatorships managed to last a long time. Look, Cuba, is still intact as a dictatorship, and America's been trying to overthrow Cuba since before I was born. There's a lot going on here. I don't think the United States is going to go to war formally with Venezuela,
Yes.
but I think that there is going to be at some point soon an outbreak of actual, military hostilities against Venezuela, and it's driving the Venezuelan regime insane at the moment. Maduro is like has been trying to organize urban guerrilla outfits to try to fight back against a potential invasion that nobody expects is actually going to happen except for him. But by hyping, by exaggerating the risk of an actual, full-fledged military invasion of his country, it helps him beef up internal support and keep his population obedient.
And consolidate his position. But there are a lot of defense analysts who've pointed out that it's unlikely that the US will go through the route of a land-based invasion, considering the topography of Venezuela, the fact that there are mountains near the coastline itself. So a lot of people are expecting airstrikes are on the anvil. But I also wanted to understand one final question from you regarding this. How, in your assessment, would Latin American countries at large react? Up until now, we've seen Colombia being very hostile to the American position to an extent. Mexico has not really said anything, but there was an indication by Sheinbaum, who is not going to be attending the upcoming Summit of the Americas in the Dominican Republic because Venezuela has not been extended an invitation. There was also Trinidad and Tobago that's sort of trying to balance out, its relations with the United States of America, considering its economic posture at the moment. It did host a US warship earlier as well, but it did try to strike a balancing tone while justifying its actions.
Right. Well, the government of Trinidad and Tobago has been supportive of the U.S. military buildup in the Caribbean Sea. So, there are some countries that are supportive. I think that President Sheinbaum of Mexico has a lot of her own internal problems right now with riots.
Yes.
And, I think that her eye isn't on the ball right now. She's thinking about other things. Colombia, is quite hostile. The president of Colombia came to the United States a couple of weeks or maybe months ago.
For the UN.
And President Petro, and he made a speech in New York urging U.S. soldiers to mutiny against the president. So I think he was expelled from the United States after that, as well he should be. You're persona non grata, as they say in diplomatic circles, when you do stuff like that. So, Colombia has taken a hard turn to the left. The president, Petro, is a communist. I believe he was associated with a terrorist group before he came to power as president. So, some of the countries around Venezuela are supportive, or others are just scared of Venezuela and don't want to get on Venezuela's bad side. But there are a few that are courageous and want something done about Venezuela, and that would be Trinidad. Unfortunately, Trinidad is not a major player. It's a pretty small country. It is an oil-producing country, though. So it's good that an oil-producing country is sympathetic to the United States, I think.
All right, so with that, I'd like to thank you for taking our time, of course, providing context, a perspective, and your insights to our viewers today. On that note, viewers, we're shifting focus towards some rather tragic developments coming in. We're now learning that the floods and landslides following cyclonic rains in the Indonesian island of Sumatra has killed more than 303 people. Large parts of Indonesia, Malaysia and Thailand have been struck by cyclone-fueled torrential rain for a week, with rare tropical storm forming in the Malacca Strait as well. At least 279 people are still reported missing, and as many as about 80,000 have been evacuated. Hundreds are still stranded in 3 provinces across the Sumatra Island, which is Indonesia's westernmost area. Meanwhile, a survivor has responded, of course, detailing the entire ordeal that they have had to go through. Listen in.
Lari orang kami ke depan. rumah tingkat tadi. Sampai ke sana baru istirahat, datang air paling kasat, benda yang dikeluarin nampak semua. Jadinya, jadi orang kami nggak tahu bilang apa-apa, pasrah aja dengan pakaian di badan lari, nggak ada sempat keluar apa-apa.
More news coming in, this time from Sri Lanka. The death toll from the devastation caused by Cyclone Ditwa in Sri Lanka has now climbed to 159, while President Anurakumara Dissanayake has declared a state of emergency to expedite rescue and relief efforts. The extreme weather system has destroyed more than 15,000 homes, sending 78,000 people to state-run temporary shelters. The Disaster Management Centre has, in fact, informed of these latest statistics. President Anura has invoked emergency laws, granting him sweeping powers to deal with the devastation after a week of torrential rain across the island. On that note, viewers, we dip into a quick short break. Stay tuned on NewsX World.